Greetings everyone, and thank you for joining us today. The title of the sermon is based on the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, and the title of the sermon this morning is Don't Forget the Bread. Now I need to take you back to PC. Remember that? Pre-COVID, not BC, but pre-COVID. Remember those days? Remember those days when you could walk around freely without having to wear a mask? You could drive wherever you wanted to go. You could visit shops wherever you wanted to go. And sometimes in those days of wonderful freedom, you get a phone call while you're on your way home. Have you stopped to pick up the bread? Anything? Has that ever happened to you? I'm sure it has. Remember that? And of course you would say, I just love shopping. Or you'd come up with multiple excuses not to go. Countless excuses. Yet today, if I had to say to you, would you like to go to the shops? I'm sure you'll all be in the queue to go. You're so tired of this lockdown. But I must confess publicly, I'm a little bit of a shopping ace. But don't tell me to go and get one thing. It's a complete waste of energy. But where am I going with all this? Well, it came to my attention that there's something called Clubless husband shopping. What does this clueless husband look like? Well, the clueless husband goes off to the shop, goes off to Spar, wherever he normally goes, and he goes and he fetches 1 carton of eggs, 2 packets of flour, 3 boxes of cake mix, 4 packets of sugar, and 5 tins of caramel. And he goes home with his groceries. And he's so pleased that he's got these groceries. And you know what? He gets home, and maybe you fit into this category. Maybe you fit into this category. He gets home, and his wife says to him, why have you got 1 of this, 2 of that, 3 of that, 4 of that, 5 of that? He says, but that's the way you wrote it down. And his wife says, but that was the list I gave you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now, what happens? We've got 5 tins of caramel. Well, someone has to keep the caramel economy going at some point in time. But just think about it. Sometimes we go into the shops. I don't know if you're an impulsive shopper. You go into the shop and you've got to fetch that 1 loaf of bread. And as you go in, you walk in, and you go past the aisle of the groceries and the vegetables and then the fruit and everything on the right-hand side, and you go into the shop, and all of a sudden you spot. What do you spot? You spot a strawberry season. So you go and get some strawberries. Why? Because the bread's always at the back of the shop. There's a reason for that. So you go and get some strawberries, you think to yourself, oh, wouldn't that be nice for supper? But do we have any cream at home? No, so you go and get some cream. And as you walk past the cream, you spot that Milo's on special, so you go and get some Milo. And now you know with Milo you need more milk, so you go and get milk. And so you add up and you've got this wonderful grocery basket with you. And off you go to the checkout with this full basket of groceries. And off you go home. And when you get home, your better half helps you unpack and you start going through, oh, lovely strawberries for pudding tonight. Yes, we've got enough milk for Milo. What a wonderful night this is going to be at home. And then your better half turns to you and says those words that you don't want to hear. Where is the bread? And you have to grumble your way back to the shop and go and get that 1 loaf of bread. I'm sure it might have happened to you before. To me, not quite sure, but I'm sure that's happened before. And one essential product we forgot was the bread. Today's gospel story is about bread. You know it well. It comes to us from Matthew's gospel, but today I'm going to be using the gospel of John because John embellishes on it a lot more and he uses it as one of the 7 signs of the Messiah. For John, each sign, each miracle points to the glory of Jesus coming into the world, of God coming into the world, of Jesus being with us. And John records it in this way, in John chapter 1, verse 14. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and full of truth. And so the 7 signs, just to recap for you. The first one, that everyone knows, is changing the wine into water. Changing the wine into water? No, changing the water into wine, isn't it? At the wedding in Cana of Galilee. That's John chapter 2. Then we hear the healing of the royal official, John chapter 4. Then we hear the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethsaida in Jerusalem, John chapter 5. Then we get the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6, verses 5 to 14. And then we get Jesus walking on water. Then we get the healing of the man born blind. and then we get the raising of Lazarus from the dead. These are the 7 signs of the Messiah that John uses. There are far more signs than that, but these are the 7 signs that John himself concentrates on. All of these signs reveal for us a spiritual picture as God touches this world in a profound way. As Jesus launches into his ministry, this beam of glory shines down from the glorious, from the eternal, and from the divine, and lands in our midst. And when this beam of glory lands in today's story, it produces out of 5 loaves and 2 little fish, food to feed 5,000 men. God creates enough food to feed 5,000 men, and beyond that, women and children as well. And this sign, like all other signs, all other miracles, is meant to do this. Is meant to lift our eyes, to lift our countenance to the wonder and awe of God. Some people have tried to belittle this miracle. Some say that, well, maybe they all got out their lunch boxes and they kind of then shared it all around. But if you have a little view of God, perhaps that's the way that you will see it. But if you have a big view of God and what God is capable of, I mean, he is the creator of the universe, after all, you will grasp that this is an abundance of grace. You see, each of these signs in John's Gospel points us towards a mission verse. And that mission verse you know so very well. I mean, I remember it back from the SCA meetings that I occasionally attended when I was at school. And I remember it was written in those little Gideon Bibles that some of you might have got when the Gideon organization came around to your school, written in the front of it. And we know it so well. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but should have eternal life. John 3:16, you know very well. John's signs help us to walk in the path of believers. The road that disciples have followed along the centuries as signposts on that pilgrimage that take us towards eternal life with God. If you get nothing else today, remember that. The first sign, the wedding wine, or the changing of the water into the wine at Cana in Galilee, becomes the finest wine at this ceremony. It points towards the end times, and the messianic banquet will be part of the feast of the Lamb of God. Isaiah records it like this in chapter 26. On this mountain the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all people, a banquet of aged wine, the best meats and the finest wines. The healing of the official son takes place, interestingly, at a distance. All Jesus has to do is to tell the man, go your way, your son will live. This emphasizes that Jesus' word has power and reminds us that God, regardless of geography or location. And that's a good reminder in this COVID time, especially when churches are closed at this time. It's a good reminder for us to know that God can operate outside of this kind of geographic area. The third and sixth signs, the healing of the paralyzed man and the healing of the man born blind, both happen on the Sabbath, on the Shabbat. And we see these signs, in these signs, that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, the Lord of the Shabbat. The fourth and fifth signs, the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on the water, are meant to remind us of how Jesus fulfills the promises of the Hebrew Bible. Yahweh fed the Israelites in the desert, and he also parted the Red Sea waters for them. The final sign, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, is the miracle that brought this hour upon Jesus. But today we focus on the fourth sign, the feeding of the multitude, the only miracle recorded by all 4 gospel writers. And so it speaks loudly of the importance that it had to the early church and the early believers. These feedings are reminiscent of a wonderful story in the Hebrew Bible. It's Elisha's feeding miracle in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 42 to 44. Remember, Elisha was a disciple of the prophet Elijah. And Elisha killed all his oxen, burned all his yokes, burned all his plows, so that he could never return to his old farming job, his own old farming occupation. And he became a man who followed God in totality. Remember how in Elijah's last days, Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's blessing. Isn't it remarkable that the name Elisha means the son of our salvation? And so in 3 remarkable verses we are told that Elisha, the son of our salvation, was presented with 20 barley loaves, and he fed 100 people. When he ordered his servants to distribute the bread, the servants protested, "How can I set this before 100 people? I mean, come on, prophet." But we grasp that he was operating, the servant was, in his humanness. But Elisha said, "They shall eat and have some left over." How's that for faith? And that's what happened. There was bread left over, barley loaves being multiplied. Do you see the linkage with the Jesus story, the foretelling of the Jesus story? So back to the Jesus event. Perhaps a good way to look at this event is to do so with three of the key players. One of them being Philip. As the crowd gathers to find Jesus, it's getting late. You can imagine the sun's about to set. It's almost time for the Shabbat meal. And they're up in the north of Galilee, very far away from Jerusalem at this time. And Jesus turns to Philip and he asks him, "Well, how are we going to feed this amount of people?" And you can almost get the sense of Philip, probably maybe like I would have done, starting to drop his head, starting to shake his head. Sure, 8 months' wages would not buy enough food to feed all these people. And so Philip focuses on this glass being half empty. And so Jesus gives him a faith lesson. Jesus had to pierce his wavering before Philip can become the man that he was destined to become. He must pierce Philip's sense of doubt, his sense of inadequacy, his blaming, his excuse making. And so we ask ourselves this question: how do I respond when the size of the needs around me appear too big for me? Am I like Philip? Do I go with the glass half empty, or do I go with the glass half full? How much do we think God has? Do we think God is a half empty or a half full person? And so I say, whoa, this COVID problem, this big problem is just too much for me, too big for my limited resources. And then we hope that, just like these disciples were probably hoping the crowd just disperses and goes away, we sometimes hope that this will just disappear. I know I do. Or do we ask for God's strength in the midst of this, so that God can be glorified through what we are doing and what we are going through? I know that's a hard concept to grasp. But think too of Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, one of the first to join Jesus' group of disciples. He's not as negative as Philip, but he has done something practical. He's at least found a little boy with his tuck box, and he spoke up. Here's this little boy with 5 loaves of barley, 2 small fish. How far will that go amongst so many? The boy is an unlikely candidate to save the day. Just as the shepherd boy David was an unlikely opponent for Goliath many years earlier. His small offering was as inadequate as David's sling. The boy has little to offer, but what he has, he offers anyway. What little he has, he offers anyway. It reminds me of a story about a psychologist by the name of Charles Allen, who shared this story that after the Second World War, as it was drawing to a close and the Allied troops were getting and gathering children and families into camps to make sure that they were safe and well fed, they found out that the orphans were sleeping very badly. And so he had this kind of idea, because they were very nervous and very afraid. And he came up with the solution that each child was given a piece of bread to hold just before they went to bed. And that particular piece of bread was held, not eaten, and it had wonderful results. The children slept undisturbed through the night, wonderfully fed. Why? Because the children realized that they would have bread to eat the next day. We mustn't have a small view of God. You know, there's a professor who teaches in the United States at one of the theological seminaries, and he always goes, he teaches preaching, and he always goes to listen to his students preach at least once. And someone asked him, why do you go only once to hear them preach? He says, I can find out in that one sermon whether the person has a small view of God or whether they have a big view of God. I have a big view of God. We expect that even a tiny offering to God can be used to great effect. The message is that Jesus will transform this little bit into more than enough. What does that say to us today as the disciples of Jesus Messiah? Where he says to us this, that Jesus can take the most smallest gift from a sincere heart and use it to do the impossible. The disciples were being tested, and we get tested too at times. We face many needs of family, friend, church, the world. Perhaps we too, like Philip at times, feel overwhelmed. Maybe that's how you're feeling right now. Firstly, every one of us listening to this today will have a family member or friend who is struggling, especially during this pandemic. How shall we look after them? Maybe that's the cry of your heart. The answer, of course, is this: in all sorts of ways. Maybe you don't have enough bread. Maybe doing the work, living the life which God has set before us right now seems extremely, extremely hard. But we, you and I, like the disciples, need to believe in the one who walks with us. We need to believe in the one who walks with us. The answer from our story today is that we don't have to do it on our own. Jesus is with us, and He knows how to make your resources and my resources big enough. Isn't that wonderful? Because we see with the eyes of faith what Jesus can do. In verse 10, John captures it this way: the ground is covered with grass. Just imagine this in your mind's eye. The ground is covered with grass. And Jesus told His disciples, every one of them, and those gathered, to sit down. About 5,000 men were in the crowd. Sorry that they didn't count women and children in those days, but this might have been called the miracle of the 10 or the 15,000 if they had. We also know from the Gospels that they were asked to sit in groups of 100s and 50s. We get the sense that Jesus wanted everyone to appreciate that they were going to be witnesses to a miracle. Jesus took the bread and the fish in His hands, and then He blessed it. And I'd use the Hebrew, He probably used Aramaic. Baruch ata Adonai, Makadash Halocham. Blessed are you, eternal God, sovereign of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Then Jesus passed the bread to the people. He did the same with the fish until everyone had plenty. The people ate all they wanted. And Jesus told His disciples, gather up the leftovers so nothing would be wasted. And you know from your Sunday school days that the disciples gathered 12 large baskets, the leftovers from the 5 barley loaves. Reflect for a moment. I like that expression in verse 11, where Jesus took the bread. Note how He did it. There's no razzmatazz. It was simple and it was efficient. Jesus put His hands in the basket and kept on pulling out, loaf after loaf. More fish, more bread just kept coming out, right in front of their very eyes. Jesus wasn't like the airline steward who says to you, chicken or beef? And you ask for chicken and they say, oh, sorry dear, no chicken left. Everyone got barley loaves and fish. So place yourself in that story briefly. How many apostles were collecting leftover pieces? As we know, there were 12. How many baskets were collected? As we know, there were 12. Which points us to the 12 tribes of Israel. Picture yourself now as one of the distributors of that bread. You use this little boy's 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus prays, gives you a basket and says to you, whoa, this is the church that gives stuff away. This is giving food away. And you think, where did that fish come from? Where did that barley loaf come from? And it just keeps on coming. Keeps on coming. And you start giving out and you feel, man, I can't feed 5,000. But you've been assigned to feed 5,000. Guys, we're going to run out of food. But in awe and wonder, this happens before your eyes. And so as we end today, remember this. The story illustrates to us, to you and to me, what can happen when we place ourselves in the hands of God. If we look at our talents, we look at our gifts, maybe we feel inadequate to serve, maybe we feel inadequate to lead. Maybe we feel or we think, do we have enough? Are we good enough? And those things run through our minds, those doubts. Too often we think, I'm too young and maybe inexperienced, or I'm too old, I've already done my bit, or, well, I don't have anything to offer, or, well, that's just way beyond my abilities. But understand this, Each one of us has something to offer. You may not think about it, but you do. This little boy had a small lunch. He had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he handed them over. This little bit he handed over for it to be used by God. Some of us would even have more than that food for breakfast. But this little boy handed it and placed it into the hands of God and said, use it. My brothers and sisters, it's been more than 120 days since we've gone into lockdown. And I know that's been frustrating for many of us on so many different levels. And I understand that, I grasp that. But sometimes we need to look and we need to find God within this. Because on one level, it has allowed us to show God's hand at work. Maybe inconvenient, yes, sure, but we need to highlight this, that God is still on his throne. God is still at work. The church is still alive. On Easter Saturday, Pinky Labala, one of our field workers, found 10 of our indigent families in Warmer Township and Quebeca Township right next door to us, desperately hungry. They hadn't been able to collect their food parcels since lockdown, so almost 2 months without being able to get a food parcel. And it prompted us to take a decision to reopen our soup kitchen. I think we're the first church to respond in this way. And Pinky and assistants have been running that soup kitchen ever since that first week after Easter. From Monday to Friday they run it, including public holidays, in order to meet the need. And we've been feeding a huge number of people every single day and every single week. Up to now we've been feeding for over 16 weeks. We feed between 100 and 200 people each and every day. In turn, this has unlocked a sandwich making exercise that is spread across the suburbs of PE and this whole area, with families making loaves or buying loaves, making sandwiches. By today, by this Friday, we have made almost 70,000 sandwiches. That's 7,000 loaves of bread that have been spread since Easter. The daily average number of loaves distributed is between 100 and 150. Just think of that. Sandwiches, little barley loaves, which have been sent out to the people, feeding the people. Talk about loaves, much of the bread has been bought by families, but also much too has been donated. Talk about loaves. Much of the bread has been bought by families or donated. Isn't that wonderful? And a few weeks into this crisis, we've also received into our churches, through the efforts of Jane Purchase, more than 18 tons, metric tons of meal porridge, distributed throughout Port Elizabeth, including here at St. John's. And having seen a growing number of volunteers that came in to help decant that into smaller packages. And that porridge adds to the parcels we distributed. We're feeding more than 175 indigent families, all the way from Forest Hill to Warmer Township, right up to Kecha on the way to St. Albans. We've been humbled by the financial donations which have enabled us to add to these food parcels and to add to the loaves. Yes, just like in Jesus' day, at our soup kitchen, each person has also been given fish. Some get a tin of pilchards twice a month, so that we assist in building up the omega-3 and protein intake during this time of scarcity. It's a joint effort between shop owners and between people who are followers of the King. There's also been an opportunity to make face masks, and we've had these projects on the go too, as we equip the community to be safe at this time. This has been run by Belinda Jordan. We've got templates for these masks, so please let us know if you can assist. Jane Cowan has also rolled up her sleeves. She's been working amongst the rough sleepers, the street dwellers who were placed in the Warmer Town Hall at the start of the lockdown. And she's been there encouraging, bathing wounds, reconnecting people with their families. And so what's the lesson for us here today? In Jesus' day, no one expected anything from those 5 barley loaves and those 2 fish. Especially that little boy who left home that morning with his lunch. But he placed it into the hands of God anyway. We were startled, we were thrown off course by this lockdown, and church closures as well. But We have placed our gifts, we've placed our talents, we've placed our treasures into God's hand anyway. And do you know what? He has helped us to multiply the loaves and fishes beyond even our wildest dreams. Even this time of COVID-19, amidst all the frustrations, all the anxieties that presents for you and for me, we are assured of one thing, that the Church of God is on the move. No one expected anything, as I've said already, from those 5 barley loaves and those 2 fish, especially the little boy. But it just goes to show there are incredible places of growth, of healing, of nourishment that become ours when we place ourselves into the hands of God. What are you going to place in God's hands today? That's a challenge for you and for me. Amen.